Hey guys, how you doing? I'll let a few people trickle in. Don't mind my morning hair. Had to get the dog out of the house for a little bit, so I thought it'd be a perfect morning for a live stream. A few things I wanted to address if I could. Stall Bands Grammar, how you doing? Good morning. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Memorial Day and my post because, I had posted about teaching children the truth about war, how wars are started, their finances, and I know a few people didn't have a positive reaction to that. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about where I come from when it comes to teaching children about war. It's something I'm very passionate about because the thing is, if you don't teach your children the mechanisms that drive wars, when they're 18, there's going to be a war, and you want them to be able to make a truly informed decision if it's something worth dying for, right? Because when an 18-year-old signs up to go to war and they have propaganda being pumped by the media that this guy across the world is really bad and he's hurting his people and they don't have democracy and oh my God, look what he did, the children, how could you not go to war? Well, it's not really a fair fight for an 18-year-old to make that decision if his parents haven't taught him what war really is. So when I look at Memorial Day, I do everything from an educational perspective. So I know, right, I could be politically correct and say, oh my God, thank you to the troops. We love you. We worship you. You're the best. But that's not helping you. And that's not me providing value to you. That's me telling people what they want to hear. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about my own background, right? I was raised by a Marine. My father is a Vietnam veteran, and when he was 18 years old, he wasn't drafted, he turned 18, and he enlisted in the military voluntarily because he was under the impression that he was going to fight for democracy, to fight for freedom, for liberation. So at 18 years old, my father signed up for Vietnam, and he's a Marine. He's very proud he's a Marine. I'm very proud of my father that he's a Marine. He is, I can unequivocally say, the toughest man I have ever met. You do not want to mess with my father, believe me. He is one tough son of a gun. And he served in Vietnam, and he served proudly, and he was discharged honorably. And he was following in the path of his own father, right? Because my grandfather did the same thing with World War II. He volunteered to go to war, and he went to Japan. He fought in Japan, and we still have a samurai sword in my house that he brought back. Don't want to know how he got it. So, on Memorial Day, no one appreciates the troops more than me. In terms of family, I understand what that sacrifice is. But there's also other things my father taught me growing up that I'm very thankful for. Because where war is depicted as glorious in the news, right? It's, oh, war is so glorious. You turn on the movies, look at these heroes. Don't you want to be just like them? My father growing up didn't allow my mother to put any pictures of him in the military in the house. And it's not that he spoke badly of the Marines. He's very proud he's a Marine, and he speaks very highly of the armed forces. But growing up, he didn't want my brother and I to see those images because he didn't want us to have an eager mindset about war. That he knew when the time came that if we thought it was something that was appropriate, it's something we would do. But he didn't want us to want war for war because he had seen what that was, his father had seen what that was, and he didn't want that for his children. And there were times in my life where my father told me that if I enlisted in the military, he would take a gun and shoot me in the leg. Now, that wasn't going to stop me. If I wanted to do it, I would have done it. But, so that was my experience growing up with the military and what war is, and from my own perspective. You know, and now everyone knows me as the education guy. So when I talk about teaching your children, when everything I say that I suggest you do for your children I'm not perfect. I am hypocritical in some things. Like, my children do watch television sometimes, but I try to limit it as much as possible. I understand the struggle. It's hard. But everything I talk is what I do with my children and the ideal that I attempt to achieve with my children. So one of my priorities, and I think it's a priority for all parents, and this is why, you know, I wasn't disrespecting the troops. No one has more respect for my father and my grandfather than I do. No one has more respect for the troops than I do. I don't say no one, but I respect the damn troops, and I respect their sacrifice and their courage. But when I talk about things like Memorial Day, right? The government doesn't, you know, when like the Pentagon and the government does these things, they don't care about honoring the troops. That's hilarious. Veterans Day, Memorial Day. They're trying to create an image in your child's mind of what war means, because they're always fighting wars and they're always going to need more soldiers. And as a parent, it's very important to arm, right? You want to talk about war, to arm your children with a proper understanding of what war is. Now, what is my background? Before I became the homeschool guy, right? Before I started Classical Learner and started working one-on-one with families to teach them how to homeschool. Well, I went to college and I studied history education. And although I learned a fake history when I got my bachelor's degree, I did learn how to do research. And after college, I came across some great thinkers like Richard Grove. Richard Grove, his company Tragedy and Hope, and they started to present a very different narrative of history. And I started to look into it, and I had the skills to research it. And what I found is, if you go back through history, if you go to the Spanish-American War, so I'll start way back in the 1800s, right? It's a long time ago. You go to the Spanish-American War, right? Well, why did America get into that war, right? The USS Maine, I believe it's called, was sunk. Well, if you just do a little bit of research, the government has since admitted, not that I need the government to admit anything because they lie about everything, but even with their lies, they've since admitted that the USS Maine wasn't sunk by anyone else. That their official story now is that a bomb accidentally went off, and, you know, the government decided to capitalize on that situation and use some propaganda to get the public outraged so that they would go to war. Now, imagine that's your 18-year-old. And your 18-year-old doesn't understand that the government does things like that. And now they're making a decision that they're going to travel across the world and fight people that they've never met to the death. This is your 18-year-old who if you're a mom, was in your belly for nearly 10 months, who you were there, you were the first person to ever see them, you're the first person to hold them. You stayed up every night to make sure they were fed, to make sure they had everything they need. You changed them constantly to make sure they didn't have a rash. You were intricately involved in every aspect of their life, from the first step that they took all the way until they were ready to leave the nest and make it on their own. And now at 18 years old, people on the news media, people who you've never met, are telling them that they need to serve their country. They need to go to war. They need to go across the world and fight someone to the death. Well, you better make sure you arm them with an understanding of how these things actually function. Yeah, false flags, that's right. So that was the USS, that was the Spanish-American War, right? You go to World War I, you had the sinking of the Lusitania, right? Because Woodrow Wilson was re-elected president, I think in 1912. And he ran on as the candidate who would keep America out of the war, right? So America wanted no part of World War I. In fact, the founding fathers, George Washington, it's all on record. They warned, they said, people will try to trick you and get you involved in foreign entanglements. And if you fall for that bait, that will be the fall of your country. Because they understood the game. So Woodrow Wilson runs for president. We're going to stay out of World War I. Well, what happens? The Lusitania sinks and the propaganda machine starts. Can you believe that Germany blew up the Lusitania? What they don't tell you is that J.P. Morgan was the man. It was actually the second J.P. Morgan. So the original J.P. Morgan's son, he was funding the war. And he needed to get America involved in the war. So what he did, because he was the bank, he had a team go out and do some research, and he identified the 25 most influential newspapers in America, and he was able to purchase 24 of them. So the German government knew that America was running armaments, right? They're at war. And they know that a foreign country is running bullets and guns to a country they're fighting, that's trying to kill them, trying to kill their mothers, kill their daughters, all that, right? Kill their sons. So they find out America's running these arms, and they say, okay, well, we're going to have to stop this. What do you expect them to do? But they didn't want the American people to want war. So what did they do? The German government took out ads in the largest newspapers in America to let the people know not to ride the Lusitania, that not to ride these ships because they were carrying armaments, and if it continued, the German government was going to shoot them down. So they said, please don't get on these ships. We don't want to kill you, but we can't let these arms come, and we're going to shoot these ships down. But J.P. Morgan had purchased the newspapers, and he didn't run the ads. Well, except for one newspaper, which is how we know. One newspaper that he didn't control did run Germany's ads. And this was later admitted in congressional testimony of how J.P. Morgan did this. Again, I don't need the government to admit it. Never get your validation from what the government admits. Don't teach your children that. But that's the truth of the matter. And then they used that propaganda to get America behind World War I, which, again, would eventually lead to World War II. Now, how many people, how many sons, what's talking about real wealth? People are wealth. How many of America's bravest, most courageous, most noble people died because they were willing to buy into lies? Well, now I think, all right, so in the modern world, when my child's 18, there'll be another war because there's always a war. Where there are bankers, there are wars. So your child needs to understand that the mechanisms that drive war, right? That J.P. Morgan's banking interests were driving World War I. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about democracy or freedom or revenge. Talk about a stupid reason to fight a war, revenge. And these 18-year-olds went overseas and they had their limbs blown off. And that's easy to say, right? Oh, hey, what's the big deal? Yeah, wait till it's your 18-year-old. Wait till it's your baby that you held in your arms. So anyone who would say that I'm wrong about my stance and how you educate children about war, they don't know what they're talking about. Your children need to understand that World War I took place because the bankers wanted it to take place. And World War I, right, that was the driver of World War II, right? World War II was just really an extension of World War I. How could the circumstances arise in Germany the way they did? Well, the international bankers waged war on Germany over pipelines and nonsense and economic colonialism. And when Germany lost that war, the world punished Germany. And those people were desperate. And imagine if tomorrow imagine you had managed to save up your pension, right? Now you're 65 years old and you have $800,000, whatever you have, in your pension account, and you worked hard, but your country just lost a war, and the countries that beat you down because they were being colonialist said, no, you're going to have to pay us back. You're going to have to pay for the whole war. Well, what happens? Well, now that $800,000 you have, it isn't worth anything, because now a loaf of bread costs $5,000. You don't have $800,000 anymore now, do you? So children need to understand that, and those are the mechanisms that lead, pre-war hatred, fear, blame, division. These are the mechanisms that lead to wars, right? Banking, the military-industrial complex. People ask me what books children should read. Smedley Butler, you want to talk about World War I? When he died, he was the most decorated general in American history. You want to talk about an American hero, it was Smedley Butler. Well, before he died, he made a point to write a book, and he said that every war he ever fought in was a lie, and every war he fought in was for banks and for mega corporations to make money. And in amazing detail, he outlines the military-industrial complex. Now, you don't think your child needs to read Smedley Butler's book, the most decorated general in American history, a true hero, needs to read his book before they decide if they should go to war? You don't honor the troops with empty platitudes and oh my gods and thank yous and what the government wants you to say. You honor the troops by teaching the children of America. That's who they fought for, right? Right? You talk about, they want to defend democracy and freedom. For who? For their children, for their grandchildren. I'm not getting into that, Purely Living Man, but I've looked into that. Salem witch trials. So you honor the troops by speaking truth to the next generation, to let them know, as Smedley Butler called his book, war is a racket. Someone wrote to me, someone I respect wrote that, well, war is part of human nature and there will always be wars. I'm not anti-war. I'm anti-nonsense. Young boys should be raised as men in training. Young boys, my 3-year-old does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My 3-year-old, by the time he's 4 or 5, will also be doing karate. By the time he's 6 or 7, depending on maturity, will be shooting guns. I encourage him to get punched in the face. I'm raising a man. Raising a man. There are wars that are justified when you're attacked, when you have to defend your perimeter, when you have to defend your homeland. But as soon as you get the news media and the government convincing you that you need to step foot, be checking out that book and reading aloud to our 5 sons. I love it. I love it. I love it. By the way, I'm coming out with another book this month. So far, I've released 4 books. Cubs to Bears, which is just good bears always tell the truth, which is teaches children the ramifications of telling lies. The Right to Bear Arms, which is a book on the Second Amendment and the mechanisms. Again, same as like the banking mechanisms, the Right to Bear Arms is on the mechanisms by which the government attempts to propagate that, hello, how are you? That people should surrender their arms, that guns are bad, so that children understand that, okay, there are forces, there are the media, the government, the public school system, will tell you lies and play on your emotions and your feels to try to get you to disarm yourself, and then once you disarm yourself, they will hurt you. I learned that studying history. The only war worth fighting is if you are directly attacked. If you want to be strong, if you want a strong nation, you raise your children, you have big families, you pray to God, you follow God, you stay out of debt, you don't take the loans. I sold my house. I don't want the debt. Stay out of debt. You grow your food so that no one can put you in a desperate situation. You start your business, Classical Learner. By the way, if anyone wants to support Classical Learner, appreciate that. You learn your rights. You learn how to become financially independent. You educate your children. You do not let anyone else indoctrinate your children, because I promise you the system will try. They will try with their education system. They will try with their television shows and their movies and their degenerate music, which is even the songs that people in our generation would think, oh, that's just fine music. That's so innocent. No, all they do is push promiscuity, sexual degeneracy. And if you went back 70 years, your grandparents would look at you in disgust for the culture that we permit. And the only reason we permit that culture is because we've permitted them to usurp, to subvert our morality, our sense of right and wrong. I won't have you telling my child that they should be promiscuous. That's a terrible thing to tell a child. Back to war. Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam. Remember I told you when my father was 18 years old, he voluntarily signed up to go across the world and fight some Vietnamese farmers. And I'm proud of my father. I love my father. He's an amazing man. He may have been wrong for going, but he wasn't lying. He believed he was fighting for freedom because, well, he didn't have Classical Learner educating him. Buddy, we're going to cross the street for a sec, all right? Yeah, quick. I don't want to get hit by this pickup truck. Yes, the USS Liberty. I'm going through the wars here, but yes, the USS Liberty. Talk about, someone brought that up, talk about media propaganda or the power of the media to lie about what war is. The USS Liberty was an American ship that was viciously attacked, brutally attacked. Many people died, and it kind of just got covered up. And then later on, when the evidence came out, it turned out that Israel was the country that attacked and killed all these American soldiers. America didn't want that war, so not that they should have fought a war for that, but they covered it up. Now, if that was, you compare that to, right, we talked about the USS Maine wasn't attacked, right? The USS Maine, America blew up on its own. The example I'm about to give you, the Gulf of Tonkin, you'll see what happened. And the America will use these non-events to start wars, right? But the USS Liberty, when America was attacked, they didn't want that war, so they lie about it and they cover it up. Now compare that to the Gulf of Tonkin, right? Gulf of Tonkin. America, they want to get into Vietnam, the government. So all of a sudden, the American people wake up one morning and they turn on the news and they open their newspapers and find out that an American ship had been shot down in the Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam. Aren't you outraged, 18-year-old? Come on, sign up. Are you a patriot? Aren't you a patriot, son? And then, you know, the next day, the American people are outraged, and before you know it, 50,000 American soldiers are dead in Vietnam. Well, as it turns out, as would later be revealed, and you can look up, I think it was Secretary of State Robert McNamara. The U.S. government would later admit that the Gulf of Tonkin was never shot down. that that was a false flag operation, a lie, propaganda. And again, because of that lie, how many of America's bravest young people died in Vietnam? Now imagine that was your son and he had his arm blown off. Imagine that was your son and he had his leg blown off. Imagine if that was your son and he came back in a casket. Imagine that was your son and he died 15 years later from Agent Orange exposure. Imagine that was your son. Shit, that was my father. Didn't go well for him. I wouldn't be here today. Thank God that he survived. Just as my grandfather survived World War II. Both volunteered. Both are heroes because they weren't lying. They weren't lying. They believed in what they did. Go 1991, I think it was. The Gulf War, right? Well, the American people woke up one morning and they saw, I think on C-SPAN, congressional testimony from a young Kuwaiti girl who testified that Iraqi soldiers had taken over a hospital of newborn babies. And the babies were in incubators, the newborns. And she testified that the soldiers killed everyone in the hospital, and then they took the babies out of the incubators, put them on the floor, and left them to die. And she was crying. And, of course, the news media ran with it. How can you call yourself a man, you 18-year-old who doesn't know shit about this world because no one's taught you right? You call yourself a man, you need to sign up and you need to go fight a war. You need to go to the Middle East. How many more people died? How many more limbs blown off? How many more mothers without sons? Because of lies, 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 lies. The bankers are getting rich. By the way, all of this is driven by the banks who fund both sides of every war. They fund both sides of every war. The same people. Wars don't happen without funding. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Excuse me. So, more Americans go and they die. Now, you're telling me that you shouldn't teach your children the truth about that? That you want your 18-year-old to make, when his number's called, when he turns on the news when he's 18, and they're telling him, oh my God, the babies are being killed. The women, the babies. Oh my God, are you not a patriot? Are you a coward? You go to war. You don't want your 18-year-old to be armed with this knowledge? Hey. What do I know? I'm just the education guy. What do I know? Then we get to September 11th. I don't want to insult anyone who's not a truther, but I don't have to because I will take it from a very light perspective. In 2000 and around 16, America released a document. I think it's called the 18 Pages, something like that. It was a declassified, by the way, you could take these documents with a grain of salt, but it was a declassified document from Congress in which they admitted that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. It's in the document. That's admitted. Basically, they said that Saudi Arabia, well, not Saudi Arabia, that a few powerful people within Saudi Arabia, this is their claim in the official government document from Congress, declassified a few years ago, were behind 9/11. Now, I don't believe that either. But, hey, if you're a person who likes to go off what the government tells you, well, that's what the government's telling. That's their official story. So why did they go to war in Iraq? How many people died? How many people died? How many children? I think 500,000 children? Nah, that can't be right, but a lot of people. I know there's a famous quote from one of these warmongers. Maybe it was 500,000 people that they asked, or if you would have known this many people would die, and a lot of them being children, would you still have been for the war? And of course the psychopaths are like, oh yeah, of course, the end justifies the means. The end justifies the lie, says the follower of Satan. Says the follower of Satan. And then how many wars? I mean, we're still at war in the Middle East. That was 2001. I was in 8th grade. I was in New York. My good friend's father died. He was a firefighter, ran in the building. How many people died because of that lie? They say never forget. I haven't forgot. I kept doing research and I said, what the government told me was bullcrap. But that's good because now I'm the education guy and now I stress the importance of teaching children the truth about war so that your 18-year-old, when they come of age, and there will be another war, of that I promise you. They say there's 2 guarantees in life, death and taxes. No, there's 3. Death, taxes, and lies to push wars. So when they come of age and there's another war, they understand the mechanisms. They understand how to track the money, the banking. They understand false flag operations. They understand the companies like Halliburton, which profit billions of dollars, trillions of dollars off of these wars, and the military-industrial complex. And I would never apologize for using opportunities like Memorial Day to stress the importance to parents of teaching their children the mechanisms that drive war. Because those, I talk a lot about teachable moments for children, right? But I every day on my page, everything I do is to try to educate parents on how to educate their children. So I don't just look at teachable moments for children. Memorial Day is a teachable moment for parents, and parents need to understand the importance of teaching their children the mechanisms that drive, promote, and make war possible. And if you don't teach that stuff to your children, you're doing them a major, major, major disservice, and you're doing yourself a disservice because there will be a war. There is always a war. I talk a lot about teaching children mechanisms, right? My post today, I posted The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? Which is one of my favorite books for children. The cover, the picture I used, it says The Boy Who Cried Wolf. That's the actual copy that I have for my son that I read him. He's 3 years old. But by teaching him, children's books should reflect reality back into the eyes of the reader. So when you read The Boy Who Cried Wolf, the child learns, okay, if you tell lies when you need everyone to believe you, they're not going to believe you, right? They won't believe you because they're going to say, liar. So it's an important lesson for children to learn. I talked about the mechanisms of the military-industrial complex. Well, my other book, The Bear from Jekyll Island, right? I said the military-industrial complex is made possible by banking. Well, The Bear from Jekyll Island teaches children the mechanisms through which the banking system is able to take control of people's lives and take control of society. Fractional reserve banking, fiat currency, debt, interest, loans. Stay out of debt. Stay out of debt. All right, guys. There is a church industrial complex as well, with its ties to the beast system. Hey, Arc Knives, how you doing? Yeah, there certainly is a church industrial complex. Catholics get mad at me when I talk about it, though. I don't like your Pope. I'll leave that for another day. I gotta get back to the house. I got some stuff I gotta do. To be Frank M. I'm glad you found the page. All right, Buddy Bean. Come on, let's cross the street. We got moves to make. We got work to do. Things to get done. People to talk to. Things to do. But yeah, Cubs to Bears. I am releasing another book later this month on social media censorship. I think it's the first of its kind, and I'm very excited about it. And let's just say a lot of you will be familiar with the story. All right, God bless you guys, and I'll see you when I'm looking at you. Bye-bye.